thank you, Dan, for such a generous and nuanced and attentive introduction. And thank you, Wells College, and everyone who's here tonight on a beautiful October evening. It's absolutely, I had a feeling it was going to be beautiful here. I've been in the region, I've been to Ithaca a few times. I've spent a lot of time in central New York, and always enjoy coming to this part of the country because it's so gorgeous, but I had no idea what I was about to see here when I crested the hill and then the lake just kind of emerged. So very excited to be here for that reason and to reconnect with Dan, who, as he said, we were undergrad students together at Tufts. I want to start by reading a story that's fairly short, just to give you some expectations, about 10 minutes, because at readings I'm always like, God, when is this going to end? With fiction writers, poets are better suited for readings, I think. But just
people just want to sit forever and listen to poetry.
but at least they know like the poem will end soon. So. But yeah, this story is only about 10 minutes. It's one of the shorter stories in here. The collection is 13 stories. They range in length and kind of aesthetic. But this one, just real quickly, the only thing I'll say about it is I'm always interested in how writers begin, or what gets them to, I don't even want to say inspires them, but what gets them to put words on the page. And so for this piece, I was playing a lot of pickup basketball one summer with some guys who, like myself, were probably like thinking we were more athletic and in shape than we actually were. And one of my friends who I was guarding was more guilty of that than any of us, and he thought, if any of your basketball fans, like he thought he could do like an Allen Iverson or James Harden kind of crossover move, and he broke his ankle. But the more interesting detail about that story is that his wife was due to give birth in 2 days. And so I'm not even sure if he really was supposed to be out there on the basketball court. Things weren't going so well once the ankle was broken. And so I felt guilty because I was guarding him, even though I was playing very honest defense. Very honest. I was just standing there, really. I don't even know if I was trying. I felt guilty, but what I was more curious about was kind of then what happened and what decisions he was weighing. And so here's the fictionalized story that comes out of that, and it's called "Will You Please Comply?" In a nature preserve outside Boston, a flash of lightning has set a patch of forest ablaze. Aaron has a view from across the lake of the fiery orange swallowing greens and browns. If there ever was a time for him to start avoiding risk, now is it. But he has covered more than half the loop, so going back the way he came, away from the fire, would only keep him longer in the woods. Because the trail is peppered with roots and rocks and uneven patches of grass and mud, he lifts his knees higher than he would on the roads. Because he used to run races every weekend and win, or nearly win, many of them, he pumps loose fists beside his hips, much faster than a jogger, the tips of his pointer fingers resting gently against the tips of his thumbs, as if you're holding a potato chip and don't want to break it, his high school coach had instructed. Because Nina will be induced in 3 days, and her parents live 2 time zones away, and his parent, his dad, has lost his mind. Aaron is just walking in the park, then picking up ibuprofen at Walgreens, home in 45 minutes. He hears the rain patter against the treetops before he feels it on his neck and shoulders. He watches it poke hundreds, thousands of dime-sized holes in the lake's flat surface. It has been a few years now since he has hit his physical peak. He didn't used to breathe so hard at such a pace. Now his knees need days off. So do his shins, his IT bands. In the mornings when he steps out of bed, he feels the weight of his entire body shoot through his feet. He uses the slick ground as an excuse to slow down and catch his breath. He has promised Nina to take it easy. He hears a faint ringing in his left ear like a hearing test. He kicks his legs out quicker and further in front of him and thrusts his arms to match the turnover of his legs. From his track days, he has been conditioned. He runs as hard and relaxed as he can, dropping his shoulders, unclenching his jaw, the way he'd always been instructed. This is the 2-minute drill, the bell lap. He breathes in slowly through his nose and then pushes out quickly and forcefully through his mouth. He rounds the final curve before he is on the same side of the lake as the fire. The ringing stays with him, a constant and annoying sound. If only I can ditch this head of mine, but what would I replace it with? His dad replaced his head with a thing that hears and sees and smells and makes noises, but only unknowingly, involuntarily, uncontrollably, reflexively. Aaron cannot see the fire, but when he looks up and out, he sees streaks of smoke rising from the top of the woods. The rain picks up and the ringing intensifies. He looks at his watch and is relieved to see only the amount of minutes and seconds he has been running. He tries to calculate his pace by rounding and dividing and then rounding, but he can't remember if the loop is 3.1 or 3.5 miles, and he's not sure how far he's gone, how much he has left. Over the years, Aaron has lost a few things while running: keys, $10, his driver's license. He assumes one day he will lose his ability to make decisions, the connection between brain and body. Please put one foot in front of the other. Thank you very much. He wonders if it will happen instantly or over many years. He doesn't know which he'd prefer. He is not as far along in life as he sometimes thinks he is, though how could anyone know such a thing? He will color his hair for the first handful of years of his child's life, long enough for her to form solid memories. Running, he thinks, will either keep him going or set him back. He's seen it go both ways. That morning, he paced around the house cursing himself because he scorched the surface of a brand new frying pan, a late wedding gift. He had turned the wrong burner on where the new pan shone without oil. Before you know it, Nina assured him, the pan will be a few years old and will look how it's supposed to. No biggie. He nodded because his wife made good sense, but he went back to the kitchen and held up the pan, grimacing at its black scars, orange and brown around the edges. Then he wrapped it in a plastic grocery bag and hid it in the depths of the pantry. A red pickup with a flashing light on top is stretched across the trail. A middle-aged woman in green capris and a tan button-down shirt, a badge over the breast pocket, leans against the vehicle, her arms folded across her ribs, her hands tucked in her armpits. Aaron stops running and stops his watch. "Sorry, sir, this part is closed," the woman says. "I'm just running one loop. I promise to stay on the trail." "Sir, I'm just doing my job, not trying to be unreasonable or nothing." Until recently, perhaps until Nina became pregnant, Aaron hated being called sir. He remembered the first time it happened. He was in college, purchasing cereal and milk at the grocery store. "Paper or plastic, sir?" said the bagger. Aaron must have only looked at the boy because he, a boy only a few years younger than Aaron, repeated, "Sir, would you like paper or plastic?" The bagger sounded exasperated, the way a child gets waiting for his parent to wrap up a conversation with another adult. The rain lets up so that now it's just a drizzle, or maybe not raining at all. Aaron thinks the ringing is gone, but sometimes he feels a sensation that lingers, even though it's not really there anymore. Like when the stress fracture in his shin healed perfectly, but for months he swore the spot was pulsating like a heart. He figured the opposite could happen. A sound could stick in his head, and his mind would somehow dismiss it, even if it's very much real and external and can be heard by others. "I need to take the most direct route home. My wife is pregnant," Aaron says. "I'm at Walgreens. You see, I'm not here. I can't be here much longer." "Sir, you're in the woods and headed towards a pretty serious fire. You'll thank me when you turn on the news tonight. Trust me, these things can get out of control in no time." "My wife is alone and in pain and ready to pop." The woman turns and looks in the direction of the fire. Then what in God's name are you doing out here? Wanted to see how fast I could run around the lake, that's all. Sir, you can always come back another time. Aaron knows he won't come back the next day or the day after, and probably not even in 3 or 4 weeks. He's tried to slow down and run casually for exercise, for fun, socially, but it never works out. He gets bored and antsy, and his legs feel like they're being held in place, punished. So eventually he rolls onto the front of his feet and lets his legs do whatever they want to do, settling into his fantasy, the home stretch, pulling up to the leader's shoulder, the course lined with screaming fans. No Nina, though. This is before Nina, before anyone ever needed him. Finally, a blast of adrenaline fills his body as he kicks by an old nemesis and lunges for the tape. Sir, I don't want to call for backup, but you're looking at me kind of funny. Will you please comply? Tell me you're going to head back that way? The woman extends her arm and points over Aaron's shoulder, down the stretch of muddy trail from where he had just emerged. Aaron thinks 5 years back when he went to visit his dad, and the den was filled with their collection of old matchbox cars, some turned over, some alone in the corners of the room, some piled up like monster trucks. At dusk, his dad changed into sweatpants and tall white socks. In the kitchen, with a running start, he dropped down to the tile floor and kicked out his leg like he was sliding into second base. At dinner, a green bean fell from Aaron's fork onto the floor, and his dad laughed and laughed and laughed. Sir, will you please comply? The woman steps backwards and glances at her truck. Aaron feels a sharp pain deep inside his ear, and then the ringing returns. He gets on his toes, starts his watch, and sprints past the truck. His legs spin like the blades of a fan. The woman yells after him to stop, to turn around, to be careful. Before she can decide to go after him or radio ahead, his toe catches a root, and he goes down hard. With his wrists, he breaks the fall. He rolls, lies still on his back. His heart, he thinks, is taking up more space than usual. He can feel it throbbing in his back against the soggy ground. He doesn't remember making the decision to dart past the woman. From now on, he will need to be more calculating. He pulls himself up, his torso bent forward, his palms brown with streaks of red. He takes a couple of wonky strides in the direction of the blaze and then stops. He sees the fire's orange glow, smells the burning branches, hears the crackling and popping leaves, tastes the wet and smoky air, feels its dragon's breath. For a moment he stands grinning, enjoying his senses, admiring this glorious mess. The ranger, now inside her truck, shouts out the window, "Just so you know, sir, I've called for backup. I didn't want to, but I think I gave you fair warning." Aaron nods at the ranger, rotates the face of his watch towards the ground, and takes off running, back the way he came. Yeah, so that's what came out of that experience where the guy broke his ankle trying to do that. So I think what I'll do is I will just read I'll read a few sections from a longer story in here. This is the story that I wrote last. Most of these stories I wrote between 2010 and 2016, 17. This story was the very last one in kind of 2016 and 17. And it takes place in my hometown, St. Louis, Missouri. After the Michael Brown shooting, which I'm sure most of you, all of you remember. And so that's just kind of the backdrop. And it's called Year of Jesus. The first time Jeff passed through Effingham, reveling in memories from his college days while humming along to Bob Dylan, Lisa drifting in and out of sleep in the passenger seat, he simply missed his exit, which he didn't realize until the massive cross popped into view. 10, 15, maybe 20 stories tall, a pristine white structure, nothing around it, not even a McDonald's, as if it grew straight out of the ground, like an indigenous plant. When he tried to get back to his light-hearted college memories, late-night buffalo chicken calzones, the Christ Kwanzaa party, public urination, ping pong, it was too late because the cross made him agitated, and he could only think of how he used to have tons of friends, and now he only had a few. And though the bitter feeling must have stayed with him through the Kaplan family Hanukkah party, because he got into it with cousin Scott at a volume such that a majority of the 70 guests had no choice but to bear witness to his most pedantic and condescending register, the one he'd reserved for internal monologue in his nuclear family. It didn't matter that he was on the right side of history, and Scott was ignorant at best. For the remainder of the party, all the relatives spoke to him with an extra layer of politeness, but evaded topics of substance. It also didn't help that as soon as they left cousin whoever's finished basement way out in the burbs and climbed into the old station wagon, his parents and sister agreed that Scott meant well. Now that he was alone, 9 turbulent months since discovering the Effingham Cross, he purposely drove 30 minutes out of the way. Lisa would have objected. She wouldn't have agreed to even an extra 5 minutes on the road, especially not to peek a giant cross. He supposed his family would feel the same way. They weren't religious, but they lit candles on Friday night, never ate pork, and didn't feel comfortable around visual representations of Christianity that weren't at least a few hundred years old. He enjoyed the drive from Chicago to St. Louis to visit his family. The road remained flat and turnless. He could practically fall asleep without consequence. Cornstalk stood straight and still, indifferent, casting a golden sparkle. He liked having nothing to do, not physically able to do anything but drive. These days work was particularly busy. His company had been making personnel cuts, which meant longer hours and doing financial things he didn't know how to do, things he said he knew how to do in his interview because he knew Professor Google and Professor YouTube would be there for him when the time came. Soon, once the dust settled with the divorce, he would look for a new job, perhaps even a new career. He would devise a plan to get back on pace, catch back up to his peers, and he would finally take the plunge into the open mic scene. He was working on a joke about couples who grocery shop together when the cross came into view. He remained in the fast lane but slowed down to about 50 as drivers sped by and then cut right back into his lane, too socialized by downstate politeness to give him anything more than an annoyed glance. It was just as he'd remembered it, tall, white, alone, made by humans, probably loved by some, hated by others. Kind of like me, he thought, and chuckled to himself, tapping the brake. He wanted to get closer to the cross, perhaps even touch it. It was alluring, but somehow that would feel wrong, taking it too far, betraying his family. The cross shrinking in his rearview mirror, he conjured up the joke he had been working on just a minute ago. The punchline was that one member of the couple always emerged as the hero of the shopping trip, usually the person who remembered to buy toilet paper. He hadn't particularly enjoyed grocery shopping with Lisa, but now, perhaps for fear of unwanted nostalgia, he'd been ordering his groceries online. He exited Highway 40 at the world's largest Amoco sign, barreled down Skinker Boulevard, and turned onto his quiet, tree-lined childhood street. The neighborhood had recently voted to open the Skinker gates. The sister and the brother-in-law and the baby were waiting for him in the front yard. They were wonderful, weren't they? The kind of family that everyone wanted to be around. Attractive, positive, energetic, not too pushy, not too passive, oozing health and vitality, intelligent but not dogmatic. So why could he no longer stand them? He couldn't put his finger on it. The brother-in-law's contentment, her ageless glow, his positivity, her unconditional support for family members. He could have murdered someone, and she would have visited him in jail and said that sometimes people simply needed to use murder as a coping mechanism, and that he should accept and forgive himself. Or was it that they always brought little gifts, the ease at which he changed a diaper, their enthusiasm for his divorce? They had loved Lisa. They were so happy at his wedding, had made a joint toast that convinced even him that he and Lisa were meant to be. Now, just like that, they agreed Lisa wasn't right for him. And without provocation, the sister boasted that she would unfriend Lisa on Facebook in a heartbeat, if that's what Jeff wanted. The sister handed Jeff the baby, and the brother-in-law wheeled his little black carry-on bag up the front door. Jacob missed you, said the sister. Didn't you miss your Uncle Jeffy? Don't you just love your Uncle Jeffy? She looked up at Jeff. Isn't he the cutest? Hey, little man, Jeff said, rubbing his nose against the baby's nose. It was soft and smelled sweet. In the kitchen, the parents each gave Jeff a big hug, and then everyone gathered around the breakfast room table over a bowl of overripe peach slices from Grandma Edith's weekly produce drop-off. Yesterday morning, they met with Lisa's family rabbi in the northern burbs and made their split official. They snuck in the divorce just in time for Rosh Hashanah, the new year, which must have appeared symbolically motivated and therefore made good sense to Jeff's family. Though he didn't have much to do with when it happened. It was Lisa's idea, but he was willing to go along with it, because why would he want to be with someone who didn't feel like herself around him? Those were the words he needed to hear, the ones that made him realize why he sometimes found himself holding his breath during broad daylight, or woke in the middle of the night from grinding his teeth. It's so good to see you, Jeffy, said the mom. I like your haircut. Very handsome, said the dad. Agreed, the sister said. I like it short. Thanks, I'm flaunting my ears, bringing back my 5th grade style. I even bought a 6-pack of Umbros on eBay. The brother-in-law offered a chuckle. What about the ones in your dresser, said the mom. You don't need new ones, do you? You should really clear out your room sometime. He's joshing, said the brother-in-law. Ah, I love it. Our in-house comedian, said the mom. Speaking of houses, Jeffy, guess who bought the learner's house? Do I get a clue? She's an old friend of yours. Really? I was never friends with girls. A friend, said the sister, using air quotes. Just tell him already. He's losing interest, said the dad, chewing and shaking his head. Her husband's a hotshot lawyer. He was on the Ferguson case, said the mom. Which side was he on? Oh, I don't know, but he's a really nice guy. Valerie Strong? First guess. Well, I didn't have that many friends, Jeff said, borrowing his sister's air quotes. I didn't know she was a friend, said the dad, proudly. Didn't last long, but we were good friends for a month or so. That's the best kind of friend, said the brother-in-law. This family is in the gutter, said the sister. Jacob's not having any friends until college, right, honey? She rubbed the baby's forehead. Let's talk about the news, Jeff said, suddenly embarrassed, but also wanting to steal a moment to remember the excitement that Valerie Strong's 17-year-old lips ignited inside of him. It was like nothing he had felt in the last decade. Anyone read any news today? He looked around the table, and everyone, including his 7-month-old nephew, seemed to be annoyed by his question. So you still trying the comedy thing, said the brother-in-law, and then everyone seemed to relax, if not perk up. Yeah, tell us some jokes, said the sister. It's really just for fun, Jeff said, but he was happy to have a willing audience. Lisa usually claimed to be too exhausted, or too untrained, or too close to the material to give Jeff any feedback after he would hold her captive in front of his stand-up routine in their living room. He reached into his pocket and touched his little notebook. I bet you're good, said the mom. He's got great timing, said the dad. Now he no longer felt the urge to perform. His parents' affirmation still had an inverse effect on him. Maybe tomorrow, he said, letting his notebook remain in his pocket. I just drove 5.5 hours. "You must be exhausted," said the dad. "Let him take a nap." "We do it in under 5 hours," said the mom. "By the way, Jeffy, I want you to take this stack of mail. All these credit card companies, I don't know how they find you here, but some of these are good deals. You can get 50,000 miles on Delta just for signing up. You can always cancel." "Or I could just marry a pilot," Jeff said. The dad laughed out loud, and everyone else commented that his joke was funny. "Hey, what about the apples?" said the brother-in-law. He converted for his sister and already knew more about Jewish traditions than anyone in the family. Apples for Rosh Hashanah was mainstream knowledge, but the brother-in-law studied the stories of Purim and Hanukkah and the more obscure holidays. He also read Hebrew fluidly, and his blog, Jubies, had been written up in the Jewish Light and averaged 117 unique visitors a day. "You're totally right," said the mom. "Our in-house rabbi. Don't you just love it?" she said to the sister, and the sister nodded, part embarrassed, part proud. The mom sliced up apples and poured honey into a colorful ceramic bowl they had brought home from a market in Guatemala or Costa Rica. Jeff couldn't remember which. "Happy New Year," everyone called out as they bumped raised apple slices between sticky fingers. "To capitalism," Jeff said, and the sister rolled her eyes. "Lashana Tova," said the brother-in-law, and everyone smiled, repeating the Hebrew phrase as if they were in an intro English class. I'll skip and then maybe read just a little bit more. So then what happens, there's like a Shabbat dinner, they go to a party that happens to be something that Jeff does not expect it to be. I won't give that away. It could be a fun little reveal if you read the rest of the story. Then the family goes to Rosh Hashanah. He's walking around the neighborhood, taking note of the houses, meets some old couple with a dog, notices their love, their aging love, blah, blah, blah. You know that. Family comes home from synagogue. They make him perform. He tells some jokes. It all bombs. And then they all go to the zoo together, and that's where I'll pick up. Because in St. Louis, the zoo is free like everything else, and that's like a thing you do. You go to the zoo, especially if there's like, I don't know, adult moments. All right. Ironically, Jeff thought, while at the zoo, he had never felt so much like an animal in captivity. The crowds closing in on him, the inescapable smells of shit, though not his own, and fried food, and then there was his family, who seemed to be viewing him with the same intrigue as a gorilla, appreciating his uncannily familiar behavior, and yet privately hoping to witness something exotic, if not perverse. While the family ogled a sleeping polar bear and tried to convince a restless baby that it was worth waiting because Mr. Polar Bear might wake up any second now, Jeff excused himself and started on the 2-mile walk back to the house. He took the most direct route, which meant getting yelled at by a golfer whose green he cut through, darting across Skinkers sans help from a traffic light, and passing behind Valerie Strong's new house via the alleyway. He stopped to admire the back of Valerie Strong's house, to get a fuller picture of what her life would be like. Making a visor with his hands, he peeked through the gate's wood panels. He couldn't see much, but he could tell the yard was large and overgrown by neighborhood standards. Trying to widen his view, he pressed his face against the gate, and it clicked open. He nudged it further so that he could now see the driveway and an old pine tree and a brick patio with a black metal table and matching chairs. He couldn't help himself. He entered the property, gently closed the gate behind him, and strolled up to the patio. His legs were tired from all the walking, so he took a seat. He closed his eyes and tried to recreate the nervous excitement he felt the first time he hung out alone with Valerie Strong, the current of anticipation even more electric than that of touch. The sun, the walk, the family, the memory must have worn him out, because as much as he resisted, his thoughts became increasingly fragmented and blurred. He woke to the sound of a car door shutting. By the time he opened his eyes and realized where he was, there was a short and clean-cut, mildly attractive man in his 30s standing over him. "Hey, buddy," said the man, "how you doing?" Jeff squinted and offered a meek, "Hey, man, sleep well?" Jeff studied the man. His bangs were pushed back with a pinch of gel, and his blue eyes were neither kind nor unkind. He wore a black polo shirt tucked into jeans, gray running shoes, no immediate reason to make a run for it. So Jeff eased himself up, but his foot had fallen asleep. "Don't get up for me," said the man, taking a step back and scrutinizing Jeff. "Sorry, pins and needles," Jeff said, shaking at his foot. Because he was taller than the man, he was careful not to stand up too straight. "Your place?" "Now wait a minute, it's not your place?" "Nope, I'm trespassing." "No way, me too." "I've always admired this neighborhood, so sometimes I go for Saturday strolls through backyards and live vicariously. You too?" "I'd be careful, man." He didn't look like the trespassing type, but nonetheless, Jeff was relieved. The yard signs around here don't always match up with the way people act, you know, like when push comes to shove. "I'm just messing with you, buddy. Wifey and I closed on this place a couple weeks ago. Doing a few renos, then moving in next month." So this was Valerie Strong's husband. Jeff was now self-conscious of his muddy flip-flops, unclipped toenails, lime green hoodie featuring coffee-stained drawstrings, bushy eyebrows, and worn jeans. He tried to come up with a joke, but all he could think of was the very real and very true fact that this man either prosecuted or defended Darren Wilson. "Congrats on the house," Jeff said, looking deep into the lawyer's eyes, but coming up with nothing either incriminating or vindicating. "And sorry about all this." "You're fine, you're totally fine. In fact, glad someone's getting some use out of the patio while it's still nice out, ha ha. Though, I would like to know why you're in my backyard. It's pretty weird, man. I mean, you tell me, isn't it? You tell me if it's a little weird." What was he supposed to say? Didn't people sometimes peer into other people's yards? Didn't the voyeur, upon occasion, find himself in said yard? Sometimes he might even fall asleep on a patio chair. Wasn't it a matter of odds that every now and then this series of events would play out? And so here he was. Jeff only shrugged. "So I really don't want to make this a thing, but my wife and daughter are in the car, and I want to be 110 sure that this isn't going to happen again. We bought this house because of the neighborhood, so we wouldn't have to deal with any more unexpected encounters now with a kid, and of course the school district. So help me understand why I got a call from a neighbor on the one Saturday in a million years that I'm not working. Maybe you live down the street and we're just a little curious. I'm sure you can imagine how this little situation could be a little disheartening." Jeff was suddenly annoyed at whoever was responsible for making the call. He looked over at the nearest neighbor's house and noticed a part in a second-floor curtain and a sliver of a face. Having money made one mistrustful. His parents' oversensitive alarm system was case in point. Growing up, there wasn't a single attempted break-in, but the alarm had been set off many times over the years by the flickering flame of a Shabbat candle, a meandering birthday balloon, a bill sliding off the breakfast room table. Better safe than sorry, the mom would say, waiting by the phone for the alarm company to call to find out if they needed to send over the police. "Sorry, man," Jeff said. He considered naming a dangerous part of the city as his place of residence, but no way he'd be able to pull it off. "I mean from Chicago." He thought about adding that he was visiting his parents, who lived down the street, but then Valerie Strong could easily put two and two together, and more importantly, he didn't feel compelled to assuage the lawyer's anxiety. "Great town, even if a little rough in parts. I have a cousin in Evanston, kind of like here but with the lake. By the way, I didn't catch your name." "William," Jeff said. It was the first name that came to mind, and also happened to be the name of Valerie Strong's senior prom date. He wondered what William Edwards was up to these days. "All right, Will, I'm going to go with my gut here. You look super tired, but you don't look like someone who's up to shady activities. Actually, you look a lot like one of my brother's friends. You happen to be related to any Goldbergs?" Now there was too much trust between them. Why should the lawyer get to feel so at ease? Why should Jeff feel so unthreatened in a stranger's backyard? Either everyone should be threatening to everyone or no one to no one. Jeff looked up at where the neighbor had been peering through the curtain, and then over at an old oak, and then down at his largest arm mole, of which 3 coarse hairs were sprouting out like a bouquet of flowers. There had to be a joke somewhere. Wait, you said you're a lawyer, right? Jeff said. The man nodded and shook his head. Did I mention that? So I have this friend, Jeff started out, no idea where his joke was going, but pleased that the lawyer's face had tense. And he does one of these new family heritage DNA tests that are now all the rage. He's one of those guys who's really into his... Jeff paused at the sound of a car door closing, followed by the emergence of a woman, squirming child in arms, cautiously shuffling up the driveway and calling out, "Andrew!" Jeff wished he could become invisible so he could stick around and see Valerie Strong, even if for a fleeting second. But the millisecond before he and she would have shared a moment of recognition, he spun around and strutted his very best cool guy strut through the back gate and into the alley, the lawyer calling after him, "Hey man, Will? What's your deal? William? What the fuck?" And so there's one more section back at home with the family, but I feel my time is up. And thank you for laughing at some of those lines. It always feels good. So yeah, I'd love to answer any questions. Any questions?
Could you tell us a little bit about like people who you have read or who you were reading when you were writing these stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So the collection ranges in kind of style and aesthetic from a little bit more absurd, like the first story that Dan mentioned, surreal and absurd, to even hard realism, which the stories I just read were more in kind of the realism realm. And so I think the absurd stories were inspired by writers like Donald Barthelme and George Saunders a little bit. I found Barthelme in grad school, and so there's a couple stories in there that, but the funny thing is I actually had written some of those stories first, and then a professor was like, "Oh, you should read Barthelme," and then I read Barthelme, and then I was kind of more inspired. And then other short story writers that I really love and was reading at the time, Jhumpa Lahiri, who writes more realism, Alice Munro. I don't actually enjoy Alice Munro that much, but she's so good. It's just like painful but great. Chimamanda Adichie is maybe my favorite writer ever. I love her short stories and her novels. I appreciate Ann Beattie and Raymond Carver, their sort of minimalism. I always have this book of Ann Beattie, the collected like stories from the New Yorker. It's tome 500, 600 pages, and I always have it by my bed because if I feel in a slump, I'll just pick a random story in there. Because I think she's just so good at being so straightforward with her character. Her characters are so rich and layered, but yet her writing is just so straight. There's no gimmicks, there's no literary tricks. Yeah. Yes?
Do you find yourself falling into writing more realism than absurd stories, like naturally, or like do you pick and try to write one, or does the feeling just like come to you? How do you end up navigating that?
Yeah, so just navigating like the aesthetic of a particular piece I'm working on. I don't think about it a lot. I think usually I have momentum with a piece once I'm locked into a voice. And the voice to me kind of determines in some way, the voice and the situation I think kind of determine what realm I'm writing in. And so there's a story in this book, maybe the most absurd story, called Permanent Condition, and it's about a young man who's, there are a few female protagonists, by the way. I just realized I'm reading it, very male heavy, but a young man who is just kind of like frustrated with his life. He's very privileged and feels like he's just not doing anything, and so he's getting feedback from there's an electronic toothbrush in the story that serves as like almost like a life coach or a counselor, and so that's and so his voice, when I started writing that piece, the voice was just kind of hyperbolic from the beginning, just kind of absurd. And as soon as the toothbrush was there, I was like, well, this isn't really realism. And then lately I find myself writing more realism, and I'm not sure why that is. I think in part because I'm trying to write, I'm working on a novel, and a lot of the stories I'm also writing are just longer, and I find that I can't sustain the surreal and the absurd for that long because I lose interest. I want to develop characters more, and I feel like realism lends itself to richer characters. Versus my more absurd stories, I feel are a little more concept driven. And I think those have their own merits. But these days I'm more interested in character.
Yes.
I just have a really specific language question. If
Sure.
that's okay. I just noticed in the last story that when you were talking about the family, you described it as like the brother
Yeah.
and sister, which had this like really interesting effect for me of creating this space where he was so connected to those people and also so disconnected
Yeah.
from them. And I'm just wondering about your choice to do that.
I think you answered the
I
question.
nailed it?
Yeah. I don't have a lot. That's perfect. I couldn't say it better
Jewish
myself.
family, it's like what it is.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can't add much to that, you
Yeah.
nailed it. That's exactly why and again, this wasn't a conscious decision from the beginning, it was the voice that determined that. Like, he's thinking of his family in that way, right? It's a close third person perspective, so the mom, the sister, like, that's coming from him. And so that's how he's kind of thinking about them in somewhat of a mocking way, but also just, he, as you've said, he feels a little bit sort of like marginalized or outcasted, or just, there's a disconnect there. And so that's exactly the reason why a couple of people suggested changing that, actually, and that's one of those times where, feedback's not always, you can't take all feedback, right? I was adamant against changing it, so, yeah. Yeah, good question.
Thank you. We'll have more of an opportunity to chat. Thank you again, Tom. I will just remind you all very briefly, tomorrow at 12:30, right here is Michael's masterclass, which is the imaginative leap on fictionalizing lived experience, where we can really interrogate his relationship to his St. Louis Jewish family.
Yes.
And how that,
I'll bring pictures.
so that's 12:30 here tomorrow, and then the next event is on Thursday, October 24th. We're having the editors and contributors to the Healing News. They'll be reading at 7 o'clock in the AER over in McMillan in the art exhibit room. So that's the one event this semester that is not in here, but tomorrow we'll be right here. So Michael will have books for sale. We can continue chatting. There are more snacks back there. And do you want to plug the this?
Sure.
Come up here, Lee, and tell everyone one more thing.
I'll tell you anything.
Yeah.
So, some of you may have heard, some around the room, some of you may have heard, this Tuesday, Phi Beta Kappa is bringing in a visiting scholar as part of the Visiting Scholars Program. Wells has been chosen to host Dr. Hazel Stiff, who is a evolutionary biologist, developmental biologist, and her public lecture will be at 4:30 in Stratton 209. She'll be talking about how our faces form, why our brains are the way they are, and also some knowledge that this study has brought for microencephalies. This is our cognitive diseases. If you're interested in that, I highly recommend it. She's going to be a great speaker. She is South African and grew up under apartheid, so she's got a lot of interesting personal histories to share as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, come back tomorrow at 12:30. Come up and check out the books. Talk to me or Michael if you would like to buy one. Eat snacks, and thank you all so much for coming out. Have a great night.